like a link I can retweet or something to the stream?
Yeah, let me grab it real quick.
Here, I found your. Well, I found the Twitter, but feel free to post it in here.
Yeah. Okay.
We're free to tweet this?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Streamer mode enabled. All right. We all good?
I'm good.
Sweet. Hello and welcome to Bad End episode number 117. I'm your host, Josh Calixto. Kyle is not here today. He's got some big life events going on, but we are joined by two special guests today, one of which we've had on in the past before, a fellow Funland superculture contributor slash Broken Pencil magazine editor-in-chief, senior editor at Lost in Cult, Zach Coates.
Yep, that's me.
And how's it going, Zach?
I'm good. Happy civic holiday weekend to all those observing the most revered holiday in Canada, obviously.
We can always depend on Zach for those Canada takes. And we can always depend on our other guest, Jacob Geller, for the YouTube video essay takes, and also contributing at Polygon takes as well. Jacob, how's it going? Want to introduce the audience to you and what you do?
Hi, I'm Jacob Geller. Yes, thank you for having me on. I make video essays for YouTube, and that has led to me also occasionally writing for Polygon, and I'm a contributor to the MinMax podcast. So if people are like, I need more podcasts in my life, then you can add that one as well.
But okay, I imagine, is YouTube like the bulk of what you're doing right now?
I mean, YouTube's the day job that's, 90% of the income. Like, yeah, YouTube's pretty much the big one.
When did you make the transition? When was the jump?
I mean, I quit my day job March of this year. So still fairly recent. And at that point, I mean, I think most people would have done it before then. Maybe I had 500,000 subs at that point or whatever. But like, it's scary to do that. I had health insurance and now I am paying for my own. Like there are lots of reasons that I like held on to kind of a normal job for a long time, but now I am full-time YouTubing.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's got to be a sense of freedom that comes with that, but also a bit of the opposite of that, just like feeling a bit more tied down to your YouTube channel. Has it changed how you look at the process of quote content production at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think the best part is like I can spend a lot more time on videos than I used to, and it's like the frequency of videos of mine has always been pretty consistent, that I've done it like a little more frequently than once a month, but like um yeah, I read 2 to 3 books more per essay I'm writing now generally than I used to have time to. And so like I think the quality has gone up. Um but yeah, I mean like it is the problem of tying your career to platforms that you do not control, where YouTube could change its algorithm, Patreon could just explode, like the companies that give me sponsorships could just decide they're not doing it anymore. Like there are a lot of things that are just completely unstable, and so I kind of try to not be too dependent on any single one of them, but it's stressful sometimes.
Well, you're building your personal brand. You're doing the persona building thing, right?
That is the goal. Hopefully if one of these platforms goes dead, then I can like point people towards another one or that they can, you know, give me money on instead. And that's just kind of, you know, you've got to play that game because none of these platforms are forever.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things I guess I'm like most curious about is what is the process of like building your own persona, because obviously people say to be yourself, people say that you need to like behave a certain way when you're on camera, but there's an extent to which you have to take on certain affectations. Like you can't just, like with me, like I don't talk this way in normal life, but I don't feel like I'm affected. But then
Right.
even if I'm like, if I'm writing, I'll have take on a slightly different voice depending on what it is I'm making. You always want to kind of like portray yourself in a different light depending on what the message is and what you're creating. But what has that become and what has that been for you?
Yeah, I mean it's a great question because like I don't feel like I am misrepresenting who I am in any way with videos, but it is like a very specific part of who I am just in terms of like what I think is watchable and what I want like my tone to be. And so like some things were intentional where like the first essay I ever made was about like organizing and how you should, you know, maybe pull out your boss's teeth if they're like exploiting you. And it was like that was intentional. It's like I never want people to be confused about my politics. I never want to be like, oh, surprise, he's a leftist. Like,
Yeah.
you know, I wanted all that to be very open. But like I don't know. I feel like the version of me that YouTube gets is when I am when I have met someone at a party and discovered that they have like a small amount of interest in a topic that I have like a vast knowledge of, which usually at a party is like the Mission Impossible movies or something.
Mhm.
And it's like, what's the most entertaining I could make like the monologue that I give them, you know? And so
Yeah.
it's like it's very scripted and whatever, and it is honest, but it's just kind of like I'm always going to be kind of the, you know, enthusiastic. I really like I'm dying to tell you this this is the kind of like, you know, this is the most positive and exciting I can be about something, or, you know, if not positive, at least like engaged. um, but that's, you know, there is certainly a lot of my life that I am just kind of not not nearly that high energy or engaged in things.
Is there
I have a similar experience with that, but it's completely isolated to pinball because I'm sure Josh knows, but I wrote a book about pinball, and even before that, I was very passionate about pinball. And there's a large piece of real estate in my brain that's just dedicated to pinball knowledge and activity, and it's to the point where I frequently think about how I no longer can see the world as someone who knows less about pinball. If I see something that tangentially reminds me of the things that I know about pinball, or find an opening in a completely normal human conversation unrelated to pinball, then just that synapse in my brain will start screaming to like hit that switch on the tracks. And it's like, do you think they're game? Do you think they're all game to talk about some pinball right now?
but I feel like with you also, Zach, there's just a lot of fringe aesthetics and fringe topics that you have that encyclopedic knowledge for, and like I think you're kind of the go-to guy for that kind of thing, right? Like Funland, which is the zine that Zach started and is now under Superculture. Some really great essays about games in there as well. Check them out. But you started an Instagram, and it started blowing up just because of the images that you find are just like so. I don't I want they're strange, you know. Like I'm like where do you people find this stuff? Because I've been really into these Instagram accounts, you know, like Gamer Dump or like Final Form. Have you guys seen these? They're just
I've seen Gamer Dump, yeah.
yeah, they're great. They do the thing that's popular now on Instagram where they'll post like 6 photos at a time in slides, and they all each have like a sort of aesthetic theme. Um, But it's a really neat thing, and I'm always just like, how are these people finding this imagery? Like, where?
Wait, okay. As someone who's not familiar with Gamer Dump, I mean, I'm looking it up right now, but tell me what is the aesthetic that they're posting?
A lot of like photos of game stuff from like the late 90s, early 2000s, a lot of game ads, a lot of E3 and Tokyo
Mm,
Game Show photos. Mine focused more on like official or semi-official video game art, and I'll give away the game a little bit. My chief strategy was to go onto mobygames.com and hit the little random thing in the corner. You know, the I'm feeling lucky of games, and like if the cover looked cool, download it, put it into the folder. If it didn't, hit the random button again. And if it felt very promising, then I might like look up the publisher or developer and see like what other kooky box art did you put out for like the ZX Spectrum or something.
It's been really interesting to watch this stuff evolve too, because the gamer aesthetic has blossomed out so much more from just being like 8-bit, like N64 low poly stuff, into like you get the cool Japanese box art aesthetic, you get the fan art anime adjacent aesthetic, you get the funky like weird box art of the 80s aesthetics that I think Funland catered to really well. There's like magazine ad scans from the 90s that are super grungy and blown out. And I think looking at these Instagrams is just, it's neat because I can see where these different tendrils of game art are going. And it gains just like a certain amount of respectability just from exterior audiences who might not know that much about games, just because the imagery speaks so much to culture at large. I think like a lot of culture is becoming a lot more accepting of that type of imagery, or at least it's not as, I guess, like,
yeah,
Oh yeah,
and or with just like the filter of nostalgia, it's like it's kind of softened a little bit where it's like you don't have to be into present nerdy stuff. You can just appreciate the past, and it's like maybe you think it looks cool, maybe you think it was goofy, but like the fact that it's not happening now, I think means it's a little easier to take in.
yeah, we're all adults now, right? None of us are like tugging on daddy's shirt, begging him to care about a Pokemon. This is all now like a shared cultural history that we have, and even if it's not the game that's striking with them the hardest, it's something of like a strange familiar history of like reading magazines in the back of the family road trip car or something. On top of
I,
the Moby game stuff, I've been just like, especially in the process of making Funland, I really pillared through the Gaming Alexandria scans, and definitely interesting seeing like international magazines and their treatment of games and how advertisements for those evolved, or like especially for games that never ended up coming out. Um, in Funland, I like in an attempt to sort of recreate a simulacra of all that. I commissioned artists to create fake magazine ads for games they made up. Some pretty delightful effect. Garrett Young's hemorrhoid journey still, I don't know. That piece is just it's a beautiful piece for a beautiful game that sadly doesn't exist.
I'm really looking forward to in like I don't know 10 years or so when like the kind of 2005 era Game Informers are now like the thing that people are kind of putting through their nostalgia filters on Instagram, because that's, that was my like growing up thing. And I just have some, I remembered the other day just like had a random, like there is a game called WTF that stood for Work Time Fun on the Nintendo DS, and I just remember like seeing ads for that in Game Informer in like 2006 and being like, one day someone's gonna
Jacob,
tweet about that and be like, can you believe they made this game?
I don't think you're gonna have to wait very long. I mean, some of these kids these days, it seems like everything circa 2005 and before is in play fashion wise.
Right. I
So it's
mean,
only a matter of
and
time
like
before like it's only a matter of time before like those the nostalgia peaks even for stuff that like we more closely affiliate with like Homestar Runner era internet.
I do also just think like culture is accelerating, and so is nostalgia, and so it's just like the cycles get shorter and shorter, where people are like, remember when they made real movies, and it's a picture of like a movie that came out in 2017, like it's just
Yeah.
Yeah, for Shark Tale.
It's one of the weird kind of the forms that I've been seeing this recently is on Facebook Marketplace. I've been doing a lot of shopping for furniture for a new place. I'm buying a lot of used stuff, and you go to garage sales, you see a bunch of things that people have on sale, and the games that people have on sale on this thing are nuts. Like, so many people selling PS2s, but looking at like how much of a difference there is in some generations of console versus other is really interesting, because like the nostalgia kind of seems to skip some generations in some ways. Like, for instance, the 3DS has a lot of really high value games, and like getting 3DS stuff is kind of difficult. But the Wii U is like, you could get a Wii U for $20 used.
Right.
Like, nobody cares about their Wii U's, but I'm holding on to a copy of Rhythm Thief that apparently is worth like $200 now or something like that. It's a very highly in demand game. I mean, and then you have, and it's also just weird to see how a lot of culture from that time has decayed, and how like what's remained and what hasn't, and what's like rare. Obviously, Silent Hill is one of those games that's really difficult to find right now. And when I'm looking on Facebook Marketplace, like I cannot find any survival horror games. I'm like, what did these people do? Are they all just in like a dumpster that Hollywood Video or GameStop threw out 20 years ago? Like, what happened to all the survival horror games in the wild? I don't know. Like, that's not a real question, but it's kind of a real question.
Well, my answer to that real or not real question is, yeah, I did buy a lot of used games from like Blockbuster's exit pile.
Yeah.
Including, my prized Clay Fighter Sculptor's Cut, which you could only get from that, 2-week period of time when Blockbuster was dumping old games. I had a weird nostalgia moment for like when one of the local Blockbusters was closing for good, and my friend, whose brain had been so warped by like our circle of friends, didn't know how to say NHL other than Chell. So they were just subjecting this poor, about to be permanently fired Blockbuster clerk with like, do you have Chillevin? Is Chillevin still here? Do you have any copies of Chillevin I could buy? And I'm just looking dumbfounded before I just like knock my friend on the shoulders. Like, I don't think he knows what that means. I speak to him like he isn't someone you smoke weed in the backyard with like 3 times a week.
And with that, I want to cut us off of the first nostalgia conversation, so that we can dive headfirst into the second nostalgia conversation. I guess nostalgia adjacent, which is Jacob, like, you recently put out a video about Zelda, and do you want to give a little bit of the gist of like what the video was about and what your research entailed and what the process of making it was?
Sure. Yeah. So the video, I mean, the title kind of, it's a fairly descriptive title for this one, which is just Every Zelda is the Darkest Zelda. And the idea being kind of, I mean, the idea stemmed from just like real conversations that I have seen happen online, where people talk about what is the darkest Zelda game, and they all kind of have, like, obviously Majora's Mask is so apocalyptic, and like, oh, Twilight Princess is dark and gritty, but even something like Wind Waker has these kind of disturbing elements of like a society covered by a flood, or Breath of the Wild is post-apocalyptic or whatever. And so it was part just talking about that, which I think is kind of interesting for a big Nintendo series, to have a series of very popular games that all have like, fairly dark either text or subtext within them. And also why, the kind of larger idea of why do people care that things are dark? Like, why do kids like dark media, and why do adults kind of obsess over painting the media that they liked as dark. All of the kind of fan theories about like, oh, the Rugrats are all actually dead, or Finding Nemo is a grief hallucination, which I find completely kind of pointless and missing the point of critical analysis. But I think they're kind of connected in the weight and importance that we assign to darkness, and then, like, I don't know why we do that. And so it is, it's a good kind of my brand of video, because it both can get kind of nitty gritty about games, but also larger kind of philosophical ramblings on our relationship with media.
What I'm about to say may sound insulting, but I earnestly do not mean it. I do feel like taking existing, you know, media properties or whatever, and either imagining them as like the most happy-go-lucky positive version possible, or the opposite end of the spectrum, like the gritty dark version, is just like the laziest form of creativity. But that's also why it's so commonplace. Like, the fact of the matter is, not everyone is well versed and well exercised in their
Yeah,
creative
I think
skills.
it's just kind of a version of fan fiction. Like, a lot
Hmm.
of these things have kind of come from like creepy pastas or whatever, where someone was just like, what if I could make SpongeBob fucked up, and then they
Yeah,
write that story.
that's something that, Rocco's Modern Life probably wasn't going to do on its own.
Right.
That's like your personal spin on it, and
Yeah,
you
and
you can
so
you can find it for just about everything out there.
yeah, and I mean, one of the things that I get into the video that I think is kind of, it's like, I'm fine with people just kind of having fun and doing this, but I think one of the dangers is that, like, you also kind of mutate the audience by talking about that, of being like, yeah, sure, kids watched Rugrats, but they didn't get Rugrats. If it's like, if it has these kind of like super dark subtexts or whatever. And so ultimately, the point of the video ends up being like, darkness is not a narrative. Like, that's not, you cannot solely exist on that, and there has to be more there. And generally, I think that Zelda games do have more there, and so they make a good example of kind of like the dark, but how that can't be the only thing you're doing.
The Nintendo game I affiliate with this phenomenon most is actually and I participated in this too when I was like in university as well, as Earthbound.
Hmm.
The legacy of Earthbound is so interesting because despite the fact that the game is only like truly menacing and intimidating for maybe 2.5 minutes, um, that is overemphasized. Like, if you were just to listen to the fan base alone, which I think a lot of Earthbound fans did, I think if, it's got disproportionate amount of people who love the game and never actually played it, uh, which is fine. Again, this is all fine, but if you listen to the audience alone, you'd think that Earthbound is like this extremely menacing and like darkly subversive piece of pop culture, when in for the most part you're like asking a dog on a skateboard with sunglasses for directions, and then he gives you a big lollipop. uh
Yeah, I mean, but I think that it speaks to, like, that it is really powerful when something kind of zags in that direction. Like, I think Earthbound is way better for doing that darkness, and it just kind of speaks to our limited ability to talk critically about things, that like that ends up being 80% of the conversation. But like, if Earthbound didn't have that, I don't think it would have, the same staying power, because like, being a kid and kind of stumbling into something that it feels like, this doesn't feel kid oriented anymore, is like a kind of cool and exciting feeling.
yeah, I mean, but when you're a kid, most specifically, as an adult, I when they added Earthbound to like the Nintendo Switch Online thing, I kind of felt more impacted by like the bittersweet moments,
Hmm.
or the more complex sort of emotional responses that aren't 100% happy or 100% sad. And Not to say that any one emotion's more interesting than the other, but it is, again, because darkness and grit is such a default reaction from people who just aren't talented writers. It's a strong example of why Earthbound can be like emotionally powerful all the time and frequently without having to resort to like traumatic instances.
Right.
Why those monstrous things are only like sometimes thing. 90% of the time it's like happy and cheery blended with like hurtful pangs of nostalgia and like a game about the perspective of a child on the world. It was added to Game Pass, so I recently played Omori, which is one of
A
the
game that people are constantly telling me to play, but I have not
yeah.
actually played yet.
There's a lot of games like Descendants of Earthbound, and this one feels the most like a true response to a lot of the themes of Earthbound. So if Earthbound is like an RPG designed to be from the like perspective of a child, but also has some spooky subversive moments, this is like an RPG responding directly to that thread and kind of completes it. Where I don't know how you feel about spoilers, but I'll try to keep it vague as possible. Um, there's sort of two sides of the game. One where you're playing a very Earthbound style like RPG with you and all your friends encountering strange creatures and funny aliens and going on silly random little quests, and then kind of a flip side that reveals, like what's really going on and kind of more sobering. Uh, like the two sort of respond to each other, and
Hmm.
um, while there's a lot of games in the world that are like in the key of Earthbound but taking things to like a darker and meaner place, this one is certainly um, has bleak and depressing moments, but it's not. It feels more like a response to those moments in Earthbound instead of just its own vanity, wishful thinking kind of project.
That's good because honestly, like similar to people only talking about the dark moments in Earthbound, the recommendations for me to play Omori have largely been kind of with that like, oh man, there's some dark stuff that happens in this game, and it has kind of scared me off of it a little bit because it's like I don't want to play one of those games. So
Yeah,
your telling of it is actually much more compelling than the other pitches that I've heard.
it's not just doing the dark stuff to do the dark stuff because it enjoys doing the dark stuff. It does feel like it is more critically engaging
Hmm.
uh, with that kind of like, RPG from a child's point of view, made by depressed adults.
Right.
There's this, I mean, this conversation is massive, right? Like, and that's what I think I really liked about this video as I was watching it, Jacob. Like, it just felt super. I don't know. Some video essays to me feel like as they unfurl, there's kind of some stretching going on, or there's a little bit too much elucidation happening on points that don't necessarily need it. But it felt like as you were kind of unraveling each thread, it made a lot of sense, like as it came in. And when you got to the point where when you made the point that you made here, which is that, you know, this impulse to kind of make media darker than it really is kind of in some ways lazy and in a lot of ways less interesting than what's actually happening if you're critically engaging with something, which to me is like the kind of thing where you would read that in an essay format on some website in a take or something where it's just kind of tossed off offhand as like, yeah, I really hate just how this game thinks it's like so cool and how dark it is and stuff like that. And someone would just like write you off as just a cynical curmudgeon or something like that who just doesn't like fun and who doesn't like this like
Right.
this speculation on fiction and people engaging with the text more. But it's like it's one of those things where you really have to build step by step to reach that point in a way that doesn't make you look like an asshole, right?
Hmm.
But and that being said, the video is like 40 minutes long or something like
Yeah,
that.
it's a lengthy one.
But it's like do you feel like you need to do that? Do you feel like you need to put that much work into like unfurling this argument, or as you're doing this do you feel like it's just kind of happening organically, and you're writing it all out, and the way it, you play it as it lies, as it were.
Yeah, I do. I mean, for this one, I've done a couple of videos where I am essentially trying to critically deal with something that I really like or do myself. And so for this video, it was really important to establish that I do not look down on people who enjoy like dark media and dark kids media because this stuff meant a lot to me as a kid and I like talking about it now. It's like Twilight. I make the point of kind of Twilight Princess's darkness was, I think, one of the reasons that it spoke to me so much when I first played it. Um, and so yeah, especially if I am, kind of being being critical about something that is not just like bad politics or whatever, I do want to kind of walk people there in a way that shows that I am not, like condescending, and I have kind of dealt with a lot of the same things that all of the people who like this probably do. Um, and so yeah, for this one, the kind of structure of like, let's start by talking about why it's good, why it's impactful, and then here's kind of the where this sort of analysis or this sort of tone can fall apart was very intentional, because I think if I started with just saying like, hey, icebergs are a dumb way of looking at media, then like people would kind of check out. But but if I walk them there, then they'll stick around.
Yeah, and that's why I was watching the video, like, God, it just feels like such a natural way of diving into this, and it's hard to tell whether it's because of like the way you crafted it, or just that's just how this thing unfurls. But it's a great video, by the way. For all
thank you
all the
very
Bad
much.
podcast listeners, you check this out. It's a banger, as are a lot of Jacob's videos. Go check them out, youtube.com. We'll plug later. But
you just type Jacob Geller and it'll get you there.
There you go. Next, let's go into the regular weekly segment of what we've been playing. Does anybody feel like they have a marquee game to talk about this week? Because I've been playing stuff that's like a little older, but it's pretty relevant. But if you're all playing,
I've also been playing some older stuff. Where are y'all on VR? Do you have takes on it?
I have like I like
have...
VR. I like VR quite a bit. And I have like a VR adjacent thing to discuss today as well. But I've played like Half-Life Alyx, and I have an Oculus Rift S. So it's great in some ways. Not so great in others.
I have no fancy gear. I've enjoyed it when I played it others, so my thoughts on VR are much more macro. It constantly feels like, an ambitious for certain futurists and tech weirdos to pin their hopes on, but is difficult to imagine being engaged with by the general public, especially after Facebook decided like we got to crank up the prices by another $100 on these things.
That weird choice. I mean, I assumed, I think they're selling them at a loss and probably still are, but it's like this isn't the direction to go. I have been playing a game for the past couple weeks called Until You Fall, which is a VR game that's been around for a while, but I think still isn't quite 1.0. That is a sword fighting game. And one of the things that is cool about VR is the process of getting better at the games feels much more like getting better at something in real life than it does at playing a video game, because when you're sword fighting in VR, you are holding up swords and waving them around and using them to block and stuff. And so this is kind of a roguelike, and there are some kind of random elements, but really it's just like a run-based game, and they're like 30-minute runs. And after trying and failing many times, I finally beat the final boss on the like medium difficulty this week, so it's very exciting for me.
Okay, it has like a sort of Metal Gear Rising Revengeance looking deal where you're like you got to line up your slashes with the
Yes, yeah.
corresponding
So it,
slash angle.
the enemy essentially has a level of guard that you have to break, and then once you break that, you have these specific directions that you're cutting to do damage, and you have a sword in both hands generally, and so there are some that like do increased damage if you're alternating hands that you attack with, and then sometimes, you know, one of your hands has like a big slow axe and the other has a dagger, and so you can block things with the quick dagger and then attack with the axe. Uh, but really, it's just like the process of skill building feels so distinct from other stuff that for games like this that are meant to just kind of tap into the roguelike kind of experience of getting better, I just find them enormously compelling because it feels like I'm getting better at like a sport or something.
Yeah, I had this feeling with esports stuff a lot. I mean, as one might assume, like playing League
Hmm.
of Legends, I got that a lot where I'm like, I am getting better at this thing the more I play it, and it's translates into like my rank and the things that I'm able to do. Where when I started, I would see people do this and I would be very impressed by it, and like now I'm able to do it myself in a way that's like very much measurable because I literally just watch myself do it or have a clip of myself doing it, etc., etc. Um, I'm with VR. One of my things is like I obviously it's all about immersion and like pulling you into the game because you're like literally all of your field of view is taken up by what's happening in the game, and you're but I wonder about like the controls itself, because as I've played VR in the past, I think the closest I'll get to feeling like immersed in the action is when I'm like shooting guns or like reloading a gun. I think is the most, probably one of the most satisfying, or firing a bow.
Yeah.
Those have to be two of the most satisfying things to do in VR just because they feel so one to one in a very satisfying way. But
Hmm.
everything else is like, I mean, firing a gun and stuff, like the thing is shaped like a gun. I think that's why it translates so well. But like when you're swinging a sword, it's like you feel like you're swinging around a controller. You know, there's something about it that
Right,
doesn't
that they
perfectly.
don't, there's not that level of like resistance or weight that you would want. Or it's just everything kind of feels like a lightsaber, basically, that it just passes through everything, instantly.
There, yeah, there's like there's a certain threshold where in the process of translating input into whatever its corresponding action is, right? Like if I'm pressing the A button to jump, or if I'm pressing the X button to slash my sword, um, there's a gap between like the act of pressing a button and doing that thing in real life. And in VR, it's like theoretically you're closing that gap a bit by having to slash around some thing that you baton that you have in your hand. But because it doesn't have weight, like there's still quite a big gap there, and it doesn't close it as much as you would assume or that you would imagine based on like the fact that you are actually moving your arm around. You're still kind of feel like you're waggling in some ways, and there's still a lot of suspension of disbelief that has to occur there, to the point where I feel like the main draw of VR is still the visual aspect of it as opposed to the control aspect. I don't know if you agree with that.
It's a really good. I mean, one of the things that I like about VR now is how in process it feels. I've kind of been. It's a little frustrating to me that controls are so standardized for basically every kind of flat screen big game that comes out, that just like we know how a first person shooter plays and we know how like a melee, third person action game plays. And the feeling that VR hasn't quite worked it out yet makes it feel janky, but it also frequently, I will play something and be like, "Oh, that's a way that you can represent this that I hadn't thought of before." And it's like pressing X to swing a sword does not, there are a lot of tricks that games use to make pressing X feel good, and I think that VR will eventually develop those, and there are different games that are working on it in different ways. Um, I think that in some ways the controls are my favorite part just because of how, I mean, and a lot of it is reloading. It's aiming with iron sights. It's doing the things that you talked about where just like guns feel great. But also it's just stuff like I'm quoting myself from a video, but like the best VR games don't really feel like they have mechanics. They just have things you can do.
Hmm.
And so when you can, kind of like have extra inventory by just balancing a grenade like, in your hand as you walk forward is something that you just can't do in a game on a controller because like there is no control for that.
Yeah.
But having the kind of flexibility of being a human with arms, I think is very different. It feels like a very new experience, and so I am totally with you that the it feels kind of strange still, and they're still working out the kinks. But I am excited in the direction that it's going.
Yeah. It looks like we lost Zach momentarily. I think he'll be back in just a second here. Hello, Zach.
I'm back. Hello.
Good to have you back.
Discord crash. No worries.
Um, yeah, I felt that way with VR too, where I think that's one of those things where it has those internal kind of chemistry engines that made, speaking of Zelda, but Breath of the Wild feel so good. Where, and I think a lot of Kojima games too are really good at
Mhm.
this, where they have that like internal logic of like it just feels like you can do something and it will interact in a novel way. I guess they've called it
Yes.
emergent systems, and there's an extent to which that translates almost directly in VR that makes the medium really exciting. But that is very difficult to create for, especially in a form that is still in its early stages.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's like Half-Life Alyx is still just kind of unsurpassed in that regard, where like if a head crab is jumping at you, you can just like grab the chair next to you and like use it to keep it away from you in just
Yeah.
this way that's like, oh my gosh, I didn't even think about that. I just did it. But building that level of interactivity into the world, I think, is expensive and hard. And so Valve has done it, but not many other studios have really attempted that.
What's something you want to do in VR, but it doesn't feel like VR has given to you yet?
That's a
I mean,
loaded question.
the act the act of like lifting something heavy. I really wish there was some way of doing that. Like, you know the Dark Souls animation that has been around for like 5 games of just opening a door that weighs like 1,000 pounds, where your character just very slowly pushes open those two doors.
Mhm.
I want to like do that, but since there's no resistance, you just kind of go like that and your hands shove through the door.
I think the other easy answer is just walking or moving around in space,
Yeah.
because that's very difficult to do, and it would seem to be one of the necessary things to get right, but it hasn't happened yet because you can get
I
motion
will
sick
say
if you just
the most maybe the most incredible kind of single experience I've had in VR is with this game. There are two of them, but it's Lone Echo is the game, and then there's a multiplayer one called Echo Arena. But the thing of that game is you're essentially in a space station and it's all zero gravity, and that sounds like it would be more nauseating, but
Mhm.
in fact it's not, because what you do is just grab parts of the ceiling or wall and like pull or push yourself off them. And since in zero gravity, nothing would really have resistance,
Mhm.
it works perfectly. Like it completely translates. And so it's like if they just put all VR games in zero G, locomotion solved. Like we did it.
I mean, this is actually a pretty good segue if you don't want to if you have nothing else to say about VR for the time being.
Oh, go ahead.
But I've been playing this game called Not for Broadcast. Not sure if y'all have heard of that.
I'm looking it up.
That's the one where you like assistant producer on a
I've heard of
news
this. Yeah.
feed.
Yes, yeah. So you're producing a news show, and you have to, run commercials. You have to like choose what camera angle is being fed into the live feed, and it's kind of in the vein of a lot of these I call them interface games, but I don't know if that's what they're called. But No Code's Stories Untold was really big on this, and then their follow up to that, Observation, both great games that I really love. And then I think the the OG of these is probably Five Nights at Freddy's or something like that,
Hmm.
where you're monitoring cameras and experiencing survival horror on that level. But this game is taking it in an interesting direction because you are involved with the news and shaping public opinion through visuals and direction. So you can be focusing on like what someone says, and you actually the mechanics of the game are that you need to switch between the angles. So like you need to make sure that you're always focused on the person who's talking, cut from shot to shot, bleep out words if they curse. You need to like choose which commercials play during the broadcast. There's a lot of these details that I'm still kind of early in the game, but I could see them subverting later on. I imagine they will do this later, where I'm forced to make the decision as to whether or not I should play a political advertisement. I've already kind of experienced this thing where there's an ad for a children's toy that's like being recalled, and one of our commercials is for that toy, and there's like a sticky note on the VHS that I'm supposed to put in there that's like, should we play this? It's been like hurting people apparently. So I think that will kind of unfurl over time, but it's a great idea for a game, something that I think would work very well in VR. But I'm thinking of a few things as I play this game. First of which is this interface game thing. Do either of you have experience with any of these games? Have you played a no code game at all?
Um, sorry, no code. The people who made like the
Stories
haunted
Untold.
houses one.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Stories
stories
Untold,
untold.
and then
Yeah,
Observation.
I did play stories untold.
Okay.
Yes.
I've played what is Gareth Damian Martin's first game?
In
In Other Waters?
Yes.
Yeah, also an interface game, I would say, though
that
kind
is
of a
true.
different context.
I did
And
bring that
I would
up.
say her story is also another interface game.
Yep.
Yeah. And then like all the
And
other
this one, not for
desktop-
broadcast, it's also it's like real people,
Yes, it's
like
FMV.
film, it's full motion. Okay.
Yeah. So you are actually monitoring live feeds of broadcasts that are taped. It has that kind of like community theater vibe that I would say like Her Story and the Sam Barlow joints have.
Mm-hmm.
But it's charming in its way. I think they're all very cognizant of the fact that this is a video game, and they're not trying to put on like Oscar-worthy performances. This one it's funny, so it's not burdened by that like needing to carry this emotional trauma and like intense weight. But it does kind of take it there with its satire, which I've been impressed by so far. I'm not really sure how it's going to play out. I mean, but what I did find
So you were saying like
yeah.
currently it's not a very like didactic game.
Yeah, no, it doesn't feel like it's being preachy or that it has anything hyper specific to say just yet. Like it feels like there's potential for it to be nuanced. Again, I don't know if it's going to actually play out that way in the long term. But I like that it feels like there is that space there, because a lot of games lack that. But it's funny, and which is a great baseline.
Is it challenging to keep up with, or is do they kind of want you to get through the scenarios?
So that's what I find kind of weird about this game so far, is that I'm playing like there's different difficulties at the start. There's like 5 or 6 different, which is already telling me something, right? Like, and the lowest difficulty is
Yeah,
story.
5 or 6. That's a lot.
Yeah, I think it's like 4, maybe 5.
Mm-hmm.
but that's still it. When I saw the
Yeah,
screen, I was like, that's a lot of difficulties for a game like this. But it's the story one is like the audience is very generous. Like your ratings don't go down that much, and there's it's actually monitoring how quote well you are running this broadcast. So I was a bit surprised that it actually cares about this. There's actually modes that you can play this game on that are like more difficult to do, which is just funky to me conceptually.
Is it like Guitar Hero where they start booing you when you're showing the wrong camera angles?
There's a big meter at the top of the screen that literally is like it goes from red to green based on how well
so funny.
it's going. And if your ratings are going down, the arrow goes down. So like if you fail to bleep out some of the words, or if you don't change camera angles quickly enough, it'll get mad at you. But that's kind of at odds with some of the satire of this game, I feel. But at the same time, like this game is doing some really interesting things where if you switch up the feed to show someone on the screen, you'll see that off screen in your like adjacent feeds. Cause I don't know if you know how broadcasts work, but you'll have like a bunch of different cameras and you can see all of them at any given moment because you're the one who's directing the whole thing. And you can just decide which one of those cameras shows in the live feed at any given moment. But it's always clear that there's stuff happening on a lot of the other feeds, even if you are not showing it on the live feed. So after the broadcast, you can go back and look at your quote rushes, which I'm supposing is an industry word. But you can go in and look at what was happening in those feeds when you weren't looking. And a lot of the times you'll hear kind of like private conversations that people are having just in like the downtime between being on camera. So you get a bit of that behind the scenes vibe. So there's this kind of pulling back the curtain vibe that the game gets that, again, feels like it's kind of at odds with what's happening in the game, which is like run a show and get a high score because it actually grades you on this stuff.
Right. That's interesting.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Yeah, my time in TV land was mostly limited to running beta tapes to the basement editors and stealing Katy Perry's lunch. So I don't know how reflective the game is of that.
That's more interesting than my local news experience, which is...
They should make a game about that. Steal Katy Perry's lunch.
Yeah, well, and then I ended up in an elevator with a craft table, and opportunity sort of knocked. I made like a quick comment that like there's a lot of sody pop on that craft table, to which like the very exhausted woman pushing it responded, Katy Perry is a very thirsty woman, and swiped a vitamin water and a chicken salad sandwich when they weren't looking. And yeah, I mean Katy Perry could probably cry herself a new vitamin. Well, she didn't see me steal the stuff. You know, I'm not exactly taking this one to the grave, but look, at the end of the day, eye for an eye, lunch for a lunch. It was good chicken roti too. It's one of those leftover meals that you like walk into the office really like. That's what you're excited to do for the day, is get that leftover roti you stashed in the fridge the day before. We all have something like that.
Sure.
Yeah. Anyways, that TV channel doesn't even exist anymore, so it's not like I had any chance of being rehired. It's CTV Sci-Fi now. RIP the Space Channel.
SY? Wait, Sci-Fi?
Space. No, America has Sci-Fi.
Sorry.
Can't.
Oh, I forget that you live in Canada. Just kidding.
You forget? Let me bring it up a couple more times.
I've also been playing the Stanley Parable, Ultra Deluxe. Have either of you played that at all?
Yes, I have.
I am digging it quite a lot. So this is now post beginner's guide. We live in has Davey Wreden done anything between those? I don't think so, right? This is kind of
no. He's working on something new, now, but nothing officially released.
wasn't the biggest fan of the original Stanley Parable. Loved the beginner's guide and really like Stanley Parable Ultra Deluxe, despite it ostensibly being the same game in some ways. But that's the conversation, question mark, also question mark.
I feel exactly the same way in that I played the Stanley Parable when it came out and thought like, oh, this is clever, you know, like in 2011, I don't know, whenever that game came out. It was like this is cute. I get the joke. It's funny. It's good. And this one I is just doing more than that joke. And I think the places that it goes are so much more interesting than the places the original Stanley Parable were interested in going.
Yeah, and I made the exact same observation, which is that this game feels like it's really reveling in the whole like fourth wall breaking nature of the game. Like that's what the whole first game is theoretically. You got a
Mhm.
narrator who's just talking right to you and telling you what to do and getting annoyed when you don't do it. But it feels like it has more fun with that, and it's just more interesting in exploring the possibilities of that and taking you to new places and serving as almost like an adventure game with the quote new content, as opposed to just using it to deliver these like long-winded psychological speeches and presenting you with these like kind of, it felt like the original Stanley Parable was just like a bunch of thought exercises and philosophical exercises, whereas this one feels like it's taking me places and having fun with it, but it's not making me ask any less questions. I'm just like having more fun experiencing them, you know?
Yeah, I think there's
I
there's
don't want
much
to
more
give
interest
too
in
many.
kind of. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. I think my internet is being weird, but go ahead.
I think there's a lot more interest in this one in kind of delving into abstract spaces. You know, like it's funny. I talked to on MinMax. We interviewed William Pugh, perhaps some of the other designers, because this is not just, you know, we shouldn't just call it
Right, right,
Davey
right,
Reed and Joint, because I think this one was
Mhm.
much more collaborative.
right, right,
Um,
right.
but you know, we talked to them about like the beginner's guide was kind of before the whole like liminal space craze and is very much in that genre. But what I enjoy about this one is that they are they are going into much more kind of out there places, you know, especially in the kind of new content. You're in these like big, weird, modernist rooms and locations and kind of all this weird stuff. And so it's yeah, I really, you know, it's like even though the game still has just like jokes, you know, it has jokes that it will tell you, but the framing for those jokes is kind of weirder than the original game did in a way that I really enjoy.
What do you think is like,
Yeah,
you know,
and I
this is
think
coming from
that's what
someone who
makes.
hasn't played the new one yet, but what do you think has like benefited both of you more this new one? Is it the additional content, or is it the years in our exhausted, withered psyches?
No, I don't think. I mean, because it's like the whole game, the whole original game is in there. Like
Hmm.
you can, there's a big door that says extra content, and if you don't walk through that door, then it's just the same game. And like it's still fine, but I think, you know, as Josh said, the questions, the new questions that this one is asking, I think are just more interesting.
Yeah, and I think there's something about the way that this engages with its whole meta nature that is just better to me. Also, like it's not as obsessed with. I feel like at the time, 2013, the whole postmodern like what is art, like are we, what are you experiencing right now, what is the nature of it, let's talk about it for a while. it was fun and it was doing its thing, and I think that's what it was based on and what gave it its angle. And the beginner's guide kind of expanded on it and made it feel more personal, and it was like less obsessed with just asking the bigger question than like providing a novel and human experience in a lot of ways. This one feels like it's in that space too, and I think a side effect of the way that these games work, where they're asking these questions about the questions and about the medium it's delivering its message to you through, the nice consequence of that is that like it kind of feels like it's setting up this fiction within itself where it can kind of take you anywhere and it'll make sense, which is a sense that I don't get from a lot of games, period. And because of that, like this game does take you places, like it goes there. And Jacob, I don't know if I'm sure you saw this, but like it takes you to other games.
Yeah,
mini spoiler,
which was that was in the original Stanley Parable, but yeah, they're different other games that you go to in this one.
Wait, what other games did the original one take you to?
I think you went to,
not to put you on the spot,
Minecraft. I think I'm trying to remember.
Okay.
There were some things where it's like, because this one released on all consoles, the like licensing, I think, was a nightmare to get those different games, because they had to be games that you could play on like Switch and PlayStation and Xbox.
Oh, okay.
No, you went to
Minecraft,
Portal in one of them.
Someone says.
Jeez, yeah, Minecraft,
Okay.
Portal were the two, and then in the new one they're different, and I think they're the ones you go to in this are very funny. Yes.
We should bring back the Soul Calibur 3 style of like console exclusivity. So like, one, you get to go to The Legend of Zelda, but on the Xbox One you get to go to Spawn World. And,
we literally in the interview with William Pugh, like we literally asked them about that concept, and they basically said that like working with any of these publishers was so fucking annoying that like the idea of doing that for like 3 separate ones, they would have just died.
Ski free it is.
Yeah. I mean, the places that this game takes you, like they're just as interesting in my opinion. But the last thing I want to talk about for what I've been playing is like I brought this up at the beginning of the episode, but I got a new monitor, right? This is a thing that people have been doing that I didn't know what to think about it, and now I've done it myself, and my mind is like absolutely blown, which is that I got a 48-inch OLED 4K TV, and I'm using that as my monitor.
Wow.
So you don't see it on this, but this is a huge screen. So
and you are sitting like
because I
how close to it?
Yeah, Josh, how do I look?
I am like 3 feet away from this thing. My mom would be pissed if I was a child right now. But it's first off, you look great, Zach. First of all, it makes work easy in a lot of ways, because like I had 2 monitors before, which made sense, but then I'm like, what if I just had one really big monitor? And you could totally do that, and that's what I'm doing. But I also want to say that playing video games on this screen it's absolutely transformed the experience of playing a game for me. Like I have prohibited myself from using the word immersion in a lot of cases, but this is just so
you just
immersive.
bought VR
It's
for yourself with
nuts.
a big TV.
It's almost like I've played games in VR. I have an Oculus. This is in some ways even more immersive than that visually. I was playing Mundaun, and this game, it's like a black and white game, but because the TV takes up like my whole field of view, and I'm playing it in freaking 4K on an OLED screen, it's like I can't fathom how good this shit looks. Like I I was playing Stray. We talked about Stray on this podcast 2 weeks ago. I am not a very big fan of Stray, okay? But I was playing this on this screen the other night, and I was just like, this is I'm have a whole new appreciation for the art. I am like, it feels like an entirely different experience. It's like, I guess when you listen to some audio file speaker for the first time and you're just like getting it as it's meant to be listened to or something, on like, and you're just listening to a vinyl record for the first time, and it feels like your ears are being opened to a whole new dimension of sensory experience. That's what's happening to me right now with this screen. It's wild. Like, it I know I'm getting like really into the weeds here with this stuff, but I can't. It's I never thought I would feel this way about like a screen, but that's what I'm feeling with this.
It just feels like the beginning of like
Thank
your
you.
own creepypasta story. What happened?
Every day, Josh sat a little closer to the screen, and then one
Yeah.
day, no one saw him ever again.
When we were kids, weren't there like 100 different commercials about like how it's bad to watch too much TV or sit too close to the TV screen? Whatever, they all seem to like vanish. Is it just like too important to our market structure that we're like looking at a screen for most hours of the day now?
I think
Okay,
so.
in my defense, okay, OLED screens have some of the blackest black levels
Oh,
that you can achieve on a modern display, okay? These actually, no, legit though, if you just have all the pixels black on this screen, it looks like it's off because there's no backlight. Like,
Next
the
next
pixels
time we
aren't,
see
like,
Josh,
backlit
he's gonna
like
be
that.
doing his own video drome. He's gonna be like pressing his face up against a giant pair of lips and holding his
Um,
VR wand up to his head and saying, "Long live the new
Fully
flesh."
Cronenberged.
I recently saw I saw Nope in a Dolby Atmos theater, which is, hey, look, great experience. Those theaters are nice, but it's like it spends like 15 minutes of the trailer section just like congratulating itself on how good the screen is. Where and it's saying the same, it's like, no, the screen wasn't turned off. This is just the power of Dolby Atmos. And it like keeps going like that. But now you're telling me that I could have that experience inside my very own home.
Uh,
Maybe I'm sold.
Apologies for this, Canadian
I'm
moment number 10, but IMAXs started popping up in Canada first before they went to the States. So we had like some of the older IMAX theaters here, and before any of those movies started, they also had like a little pre-show, like walking you through
Hmm.
what an IMAX was, and be like, "This is how large the screen is." And if you look closely, you can see the speakers, and then like backlight behind the screen, so you could like see physically where the speakers. The speakers are over here, and then like a symphony noise plays. The speakers are over here, symphony noise over there, and then like the big one up, and here just thunder. Did they do that like in the stateside too?
Oh
Did you get
yeah,
like, oh yeah,
yeah.
beautiful. I'm so
And I
glad to
always
hear
felt
that.
like it's like I
some of the
already
first
bought
ones,
the
I
ticket.
think.
I'm in here. Like you don't have to convince me that it's good.
Should they add like another thing of like raise of hands if you've seen this shit before?
They wanted you to feel better about spending $25 on a movie ticket.
Well, the real strategy
Um,
is giving you no other
Nope is
option.
good, by the way.
I haven't seen it
That's
yet.
true. That's true.
Oh yeah, it is.
I don't really
Josh,
know
I have
what else to say. Go ahead. Go ahead.
um, I have always been kind of kicking around the idea of getting like a big ultra wide has kind of been my like if I was to spend a bunch of money on a monitor. Um, but it's like the challenge, and I bet you kind of had this thought before, is like you don't really know how it's gonna be until you just do it. So it's like I could get it, and it turns out I hate it, and I would have just spent a bunch of money on this, or like my graphics card couldn't run games on it anymore, or something. But I have played with the idea of doing some absurd thing with screens.
Get this screen, Jacob. I'm telling you, it's well, the reason why, the fact that it's a TV display, it can be used as a monitor, is like it actually has like 120 hertz refresh rate. It has like 0 millisecond response time, not actually 0, but it's very fast. It works like a monitor. It's just a TV screen. So a lot of people are using this as a monitor, but it's really good. Like, I thought it was gonna be annoying, but it's not. It's the shit. It's the shit. And video games, I didn't think that I could have this feeling when it comes to. I think the reason why I'm freaking out about this so much is because, like, you remember when you went from PlayStation 1 to PS2, or when you went from PS2 to PS3 to a lesser extent, it was that feeling of like, whoa, like there's still so much potential for immersion in this medium, and like it just feels better to watch this. That's what this jump to this screen is like, going from PS3 to PS6. It's the biggest jump I've felt since the PS2 to PS3 jump.
But Josh, have you watched Twister on it yet? I mean, that's where we separate the TVs from the zoetropes.
I watched a couple anime clips in 4K, and then like those YouTube videos that are like Tokyo walk around Switzerland at midnight, in the rain, 4K. Those are pretty
Tokyo
cool.
walk around Switzerland
they look
at midnight.
Great.
All I need is the TV. Just me and the TV. I don't need anyone else.
Seamlessly blends Japan and Switzerland. Yeah. All that's to say, it's a great experience.
Cross-cultural experience.
And you should check it out.
I have been on my laptop, which is currently held together with Gorilla Tape. I played Garage Bad Dream Adventure, the extremely hard to find Japanese game from like 1996 that was recently released in English for the first time this year. First on smartphones, which didn't seem like the ideal way to play this game, but finally on Steam about a month ago. And the Steam version, let me just say this, real nice port, buttery smooth. Feel like it's doing everything it should. But as far as what this game is, it's this sort of like surrealist, nightmarish little horror game where you awaken to find that you are a grotesque looking little robot with a big pot belly. Everything's like shit brown. It's like a piss world. Everything's rusted and metal. And to make things even more like cumbersome, you and everyone else in this robot world can only maneuver around this like track on the ground, like these little choo-choo train tracks. And that's how you sort of navigate around the entire space. Now, as like surreal and horrific as this world is, the gameplay itself is like actually pretty coherent. Like the whole like you're told you have to escape from this world, and this whole world revolves around you, the male robots, going fishing for frogs to catch the frogs to give to the lady robots, so they can sort of in their psychosexual way put them in their tummies and turn them into milk oil to keep all the other robots going. So you have these sort of two different stamina bars of Garage Bad Dream Adventure. And yeah, so on top of like trying to accomplish all the little tasks you give yourself, you also have to keep up your two stamina bars of ego and fuel. There's like multiple ways to get new fuel, but you have to like go around, catch bait, which are like you put down crab traps to catch crabs, use the crabs to catch frogs. You can exchange the frogs and the crabs for money to get fuel or boost up your ego, which is your other stamina bar. but at the same time, slowly like finding parts and upgrades to help you escape this horrible little dimension you've waken up in. Navigating it is pretty unique. It's all like pre-rendered and looks very nice too. Uh, but because, like I said, you move along these tracks, there are twin rails. There's like an inner track and an outer track to most areas, and when you're on each track, the perspective flips. So keeping track of like which turns are taking you where can be a little confusing. You got to make very good and strategic use of that map. Um, but I'm enjoying it a lot. It's unique and strange and surrealist without like becoming like completely obtuse. It might take a little bit just to get used to like how you navigate around the world on those two tracks, but once you get a feel for it and get into the rhythm of like fishing and maintaining your ego and your fuel, it reminds you a bit of like Moon Remix RPG in that way, where like part of the puzzle was like finding new ways to like find shortcuts or maintain your stamina. And in the way that game handled it, didn't make it feel cumbersome. It made it explicitly feel like part of the challenge in a way that some games, usually around like, you know, maintaining your weapons, kind of fail. Like a lot of games where you have to maintain your weapons, it really sucks. It doesn't feel like something that's adding to the joy of the experience. Whereas when it's a little bit more thoughtful, when maintaining these resources are like part of the puzzle you're simultaneously solving, that's more enriching. And yeah, I didn't really know what to expect going into this game, like other than knowing it's like one of those rare Japanese PC games from the late 90s. I think they only made 3,000 copies of it
I was
initially.
gonna ask, is this like held in very high esteem in Japan, or is it more or less unknown there too?
I think it's unknown there too because they only printed 3,000 copies of it, and like
Right.
no one got to fucking play it. It just became like the all right, like all the so many games came out on whether it's PlayStation disc or PC disc. It feels like the deepest well of like games yet to be discovered is still like the PlayStation 1 catalog, and even more so the generally unpopular Japanese gaming PC gaming scene. Like PC gaming was so unpopular in Japan that a lot of PC games that came out in America only came out on PlayStation in Japan, but also didn't come out on PlayStation here. So there's like PlayStation exclusively PlayStation version of American PC games in Japan that never came out here. So the Neverhood never came out on PC. I mean on PlayStation here. It did in Japan. And even more delightfully, and you know, I could get up and get it because I have it, but the Japanese version of Beavis and Butthead Virtual Stupidity for the PlayStation that only came out in Japan and absolutely has Japanese voiceovers for all the characters is another good example in which just like two Japanese comedians sort of like crudely try to recreate the semi brain fried Texas voices that Beavis and Butthead had delightfully subjected us to over many wonderful years. Um, but yeah, the this port of Garage, however it ran initially, like it feels like it's running great. The people who did this port did a lovely little job. And if you love like really grimy and weird vintage PC adventure games, this one feels like the real deal. It doesn't just feel like this curiosity. It feels like it even has more going on than some of the ones we hold up as classics, like Bad Day on the Midway or Bad Mojo kind of affairs. Um, I also played that Xbox Game Pass game, Escape Academy, and I'm just thinking about it now because like that's the whole game where the shtick is you're escaping these, you know, various escape rooms as part of like a university setting, but all the game made me feel is like most adventure games are already an escape room, and this is just an easier version of that because I'm just in one room at a time and I can only interact with five objects.
Yeah, I mean, I've been playing that game in kind of it does actually have, I think, even official couch co-op, but I have been playing the unofficial couch co-op where I'm just sitting next to my partner and we're both saying like, how about you try this?"
Yeah.
And it's like that's fun. It's not hard, it's
No.
not super
What's going
I
on,
I
guys?
haven't I
Welcome
haven't
back to
been
my
like blown
channel. This
away
is
by
going to be
anything, but like it is a nice one of those games, particularly if someone isn't like super into games but might be into more traditional puzzles. I do think that you know, they don't operate on like game logic that much. They do work with kind of like if you were good in an escape room, you could probably be good at this. Um, but it is exactly what it says on the tin.
Mhm. I mean, I don't like. I'll say it's easy, but I'm not gonna say it's bad because it feels like it's made for an audience somewhat younger than myself and somewhat younger than
Hmm.
ourselves to dive into. And that's the same reason I want just to clarify before when I was saying like the dark and gritty versions of pop culture stuff. Just because I'm saying like it's a less talented way to construct a story doesn't make me say like it's bad to enjoy that or engage with that. Because again, it's just for a teenaged or teenage minded audience, and the fact that you know our culture or digital culture forces us to share spaces with them doesn't mean we have to show them any more animosity than the world is already subjecting us all to. It's just accept that there's an audience for this kind of stuff, and maybe it's not sitting in your tummy perfectly for you, but we're all stuck together. We got to make the best of it. In a big wad. We're all culturally we're a
exactly the
big
PSA.
wad with all the little kids and the
Morris.
geezers.
I it's the escape room thing is interesting to me because it's like it feels like we kind of come full circle here where escape rooms feel like they're influenced by video game puzzle design in a very clear and direct way, but now we have escape room games that are taking influence from the way escape rooms are made that, as you describe it, Jacob, don't rely on video game logic, which is funny that like we needed escape rooms to exist before we could make escape room games. I guess like escape the room games have existed before, like in flash games and whatnot, but now there's this like sensation around it of like, what if it was a cooperative experience, and what if it was like an actual immersive thing instead of just like a curiosity that you engage with for 1 hour in a mobile game format. um but it's interesting like how this genre is evolving due to now being influenced by the escape room medium.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a weird kind of recursive idea to have. It's like now we will have the Escape Academy real life escape room will be at like the next E3 or something.
The
Yeah,
first time I did an escape room,
escape
my dad
room.
first time I did an escape room, my dad is claustrophobic and he was like scared for me. He kept like sending me texts saying like if you get stuck or they don't let you out, just call and I'll break the door down. Like, Dad, I'm pretty sure they're gonna like let me out. I don't think it's like
So no, sorry, you
I
gotta die in there. You
yeah,
didn't
yeah.
do it fast enough.
You have to solve the puzzle or that door ain't opening. I had a friend who was easily
I
stressed as well by the Mission Impossible theme that was playing throughout the last 5 minutes, and he's like, "I don't need this at all. This doesn't make me any more productive." I think we're 2 or 3 big puzzles away from getting that final door open. Rats.
Yeah, I mean, it's the escape room genre is just such a weird thing though, because I feel like I always want more out of my escape room experiences. My mom was obsessed with going to an escape room, right? She was like, I don't know why. She's not the kind of person who I would think would be into this type of thing, but she's like, I really want to go to an escape room. So for her birthday, we took her to an escape room, and I couldn't tell like if she was having fun with it or not. And it also feels weird to be there as a person who like plays video games and has done this kind of thing before, where I'm like, should I sandbag a little bit? Should I like I don't want to make this less fun by being too good at the escape room because I have this stupid set of knowledge that I shouldn't have, that makes no sense and has no actual application in the real world. I just know the logic of these games and how they work. And it's like, I wish sometimes that an escape room actually felt like an escape room. Like I have to solve actual problems that and this is what I thought that an escape room would be. Like you actually need to do things that you would have to do in order to escape from a room that looked like said room. Instead, it's like, find the hidden code that is like someone unspecified person used a code on a lock, and there's clues in like the painting on the wall that you need to find first. It's like, this isn't how I want to escape from a fucking room. Like I want to MacGyver my way out. And this is why they have to tell people to like not pull stuff off the walls, because it's way more interesting if there was like something hidden behind the shelf that you need to pry off with your bare arms. Like
everyone's looking for that book that'll like
something
make
more
the
that is
bookcase pop open.
Exactly. And you know, maybe in some escape rooms that book is actually there that activates a door or something. And but I wish there was actually more human planet Earth knowledge that you could apply to this, and like the way that things work in real life, as opposed to like how things work in video games that I have to apply to the escape room to escape, and just essentially solving a long chain of riddles. I don't know. I'm criticizing escape rooms now, but that's what I want. That's what I want.
I hate when they make me do math. I don't want to do math. I want observation puzzles and sort of like logic puzzles, fine, but don't make me have to like do an exam. I'm done with that. I got my high school. I got my bachelor's, you dorks. I don't need to do
Logic
long
puzzles.
division right now. Logic puzzles I'm fine with. There was a, I don't know if, I think it's more substantiated than just a rumor, but apparently when Disneyland didn't know what to do with like a big piece of like island real estate off their Orlando resort stuff, they, in the years between like it being the top selling game of all time and The Sims coming out, they seriously considered turning like a island sized space into Myst, like a Myst puzzle
God.
attraction through the 90s. And just imagining, you know, the kind of highs and lows and frustrations of Myst with the added benefit of actually having to walk back and forth between ciphers and locks and puzzles and switches and knobs.
What a world. It's like
Almost
the
admittedly is the best escape room.
the picture of like this would be the future if it's like the future if Disney made a Mist Island. Josh,
Getting lost overnight on the Mist Island.
do you want us to like, I feel you're like 2 or 3 seconds off from us, but your voice sounds fine, so I don't know if it would work for us to like leave and come back to the call or something.
I'll leave and come back. And the recording is local, so we don't have to worry about it. I'll sync it.
Right.
It'll be fine for the podcast. Yeah, I'll hang up and come back. Just a sec.
Hello.
Okay, are you contemporaneous with us now?
I think we're pretty much live. Yeah.
Okay, I mean that feels better.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe.
No, maybe not.
Okay, Josh, complete my sentence. Hey.
No, that's totally off. It's still off. I don't really know what's going on. This has never happened before, as it were. Noise suppression. Let's not do that. Okay, I'll try one more hang up and come back. Hello.
Hello.
We're here.
Yeah,
I
it's
mean,
still not.
it's
I don't know
certainly
why.
not unworkable. So we can just keep on trucking.
Hmm. Just know that if we interrupt you, Josh, we're not being rude. We're being good podcast guests.
No, yeah, I've been trying to like talk differently to account for that, but whatever. Um. Okay. So, escape rooms.
Escape rooms. I've only done one indoor one and one outdoor one, and the outdoor one was like a spooky Halloween one where you went through Black Creek Pioneer Village sort of place and you know mixed some blocks around until you got the right symbols. I can't even remember if we won it because it's big tech doesn't want us podcasting about escape rooms. We're getting too close to what the world would have looked like had Disney built the Mist Island, and Big Brother can't handle poured out into the world. Truism. Yep.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
I tried resetting something and it reset my thing, but yeah, it's not. I don't know what's going on. I'll have to figure it out after this. But again, the actual episode will be fine. It's just something's weird with my Discord audio right now and the syncing, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
No worries.
But I think we can actually move on to listener questions just real quick before we wrap up here. There's only like 2. But let's see. So, first off, what's something you wish games did more / better that other media does?
Write characters. I don't know. Um, I mean, honestly, I do think that um, there are so few games where you kind of don't have to put the like good story for a game disclaimer after it, that I think that different storytelling mechanisms can make them compelling in ways that other media aren't, but like really I just feel like the level of writing is so far behind more established media and we have just kind of like we understand that as part of games, but I don't think it necessarily has to be.
And it's not due to lack of trying either. It's just like an undervalued aspect of most commercial games.
Yeah, I mean, I think just making a game is so hard, and like figuring out how the story is going to work in it has to fit with like so many other variables than in when you're writing a book or something, that yeah, you just kind of it it is competing for real estate with 47 other things.
Yeah. And I
Yeah,
mean,
and I
like
thought
when
it
it
was
is
strange that in this. I thought it was strange that in the Stanley Parable, and in the other Davey Reedon / Pew / Reedon and Co games, as I'll call them here, it feels like they need to go outside of the purview of how we conventionally understand video games to kind of engage better with like media in general and to like tell a more human story. Like the beginner's guide is all about breaking out of the video game form, and it takes place in this space that is kind of neither within the video game medium. It feels almost like a podcast being told with video games as an example, but is not like exclusive to the video game form. And I felt like that was one of the best stories ever told within like the medium of video games, although it's like trying as hard as it can to like not be a game in some ways, and is like pointing at the medium itself from the outside. So I think that tells me a bit of something about like video games have like a ways to go in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, and the beginner's guide is also a good example because, like, you know, that also could not be that couldn't be a book, or a movie. Like, it is necessarily a game, and it is using the medium in a way that is like core to its storytelling. But yeah, at the same time, it is so different than how we think of game stories being told. Um, maybe we're just kind of too locked into. It's funny, this is the reverse of what the question says, but I think a big failure is we're too locked into trying to emulate other forms of media. I don't think writing a game story like a movie script works, really. And I think kind of trying to do that is where some of the problems come from.
Trying to emulate like your
It's not
emotional response to things that movies or music or books does is a greater use of your time than trying to emulate specific like devices or moments specifically that those films do. Like
Hmm.
a game like The Beginner's Guide or even a game like Disco Elysium works partly because of the form, and especially in Disco, it gives so much space for those delicious little words to sort of percolate in your ears a little bit, uh, in a way that's not emulating, but certainly evocative of ways I've enjoyed the prose in a book.
Yeah, I think like video games need to get better at doing themselves. And have that kind of confidence in itself as a form, the way that film or literature does. Kind of to Jacob's point a little bit more. Um, let's move on to the next question, just because I think that this one there's a bit more to unpack here in some ways, but as a critic slash writer slash artist, creator, etc., do you ever look at something that you make and worry that you don't actually have anything meaningful or valuable to say, and or how do you deal with that?
Sure, all the time. um, I don't know. I mean, I think the way that I pick video topics is kind of thinking both like, have I seen someone else do this? Then I don't really need to do it. And also like, I don't want to um I don't want to write something or start writing something if I already like know the answer to it, really. Like I don't want to be able to, like, if I saw my own video title, I wouldn't be like, well, obviously he's going to say X. And so, like, I think sometimes the not having anything valuable to say comes from having the point you're trying to make just be a point that 1,000 people have already reiterated or something. And so going in not knowing exactly what you're doing, I think, is actually a, a decent way of kind of making sure that you come out with something novel. But that could also be specific to me, and I don't know. I don't know how helpful it is.
I get this
Uh,
thing where when I make something just in general, I I will take that course where I'm like, okay, I'm going to start here with this big question that I feel like leaves me a lot of space to kind of do the work and figure out what my potential answer to this would be. And then when I come to that answer, I'm like, did I and I like kind of survey the entire argument, what I've said and what the arc of it is, and I'm like, did I say anything interesting here that like I wouldn't have known before? And it's weird because you've had so much exposure to your own thing at that point where you're just like, I don't know if I could see this as novel no matter what, because I'm just like biased against it because I've spent so much damn time with the thing.
Right.
And then B, it's hard to get out of your own head to get the context of like there's a certain extent to which every point when made sounds intuitive. You know, like in some cases, if you do a good job, it will have felt as if this insight was already there in a sense. So
Yep.
I think those are like two things that are always kind of working against you, so that make it hard to judge what you're doing. I don't know. Do you experience that as well?
I think that is a great point. Yeah, that if you're doing a good enough job of explaining, it's going to feel obvious. But in fact, it wasn't obvious until you did all the work to write it out so clearly.
Being trapped in your own mind and your own voice is, you know, a common and unpleasant experience. And there's 101 different ways to say touch grass, but going for a walk can be pretty helpful to just like tone turn the volume down on your own bramble of thoughts and less based on the what you're being exposed to on your like digital feeds, and just go for a walk, get some air, clear house, and what you'll be left with is sort of like the more resonant ideas you had on whatever you were working on, uh, after it gets filtered through like the, you know, the coffee filter of seeing a pretty bird or
I
getting an
do
ice
also
cream.
think the thing of just kind of like explaining it to your pet or whatever is both good in making sure you know what you're saying and can say it, you know, concisely. And also just like, hey, you know what? Your pet is going to be interested in the things that you have to say about like neon white, even if it feels, you know, kind of useless in the moment that you're writing it.
And, you know, at the end of the day, you're doing it for yourself, right? You're doing it for yourself. At least that's what it helps to tell yourself. And it helps to kind of get that out there. If that's the mindset you have of like kind of releasing these thoughts in an almost like diary sense, this like self therapy, as it were, and or reckoning with your own stance on a specific subject. I think that's like also a helpful way of looking at it, even if it's not like 100% realistic. I mean, at least like that's what I do to myself to try and make sure that I'm like in the right space, doing things for the right reason, and have like the correct expectations set for things, you know?
I think that it's, I mean, I'm sure we're all familiar with the experience of kind of going back to something that you did uh, earlier and kind of cringing at it. But I also think that given enough time, you can actually look back on things and kind of your words can be a little foreign to you again in a way that reminds you like, hey, you know what, this is actually decent. Like, I forgot how in my head I was while writing this, and now just reading it kind of as a stranger, I can see that this is good and has value. And if that's how I feel about this thing that I did a year ago, then I can kind of assume that a year from now I will feel this way about what I'm working on.
That's a
Yeah, and
good measuring stick for, I think, success and or progress.
and now I have a whole team of people who I specifically tell me that if something I wrote is stupid, you know, let me know as soon as possible.
And you do the same to them.
I mean, yeah, I don't use the word stupid, but things got to get fixed.
God, this the comic timing on 3 second delay Discord is really difficult. I'm assuming it's something like with my memory or something. I'd probably have to like reset my computer or something. Obviously, it's not conducive to a stream, but it'll sound fine on the podcast because I'm gonna edit it and cut them all together. But I think we're good to wrap unless anybody else has anything to add here. Question mark? Question
Vampire
mark?
Survivors Game of the Year. Have y'all talked about Vampire Survivors yet?
Yes, we have. And do you have something coming out on that, or do you have like a
No,
take
I just
that you
think it.
want to
I
share
mean,
with
it's
the
like
world here?
honestly, my feelings are on it are conflicted because like I think slot machines are bad, but like man, I love that game.
it boils down all of the things that feel good about a video game into some of its like most lizard brain component parts, and it just works so well despite the fact that you don't even, all you do is move like around the screen. You don't even press a
I
button
mean,
to shoot.
you know
And
that they have a new trait or a new character that's literally just a tree. And it can like you almost can't move. It moves very, very slowly. And like that's so it removes like the one part of the game that is the part that you play, and it's still fun.
I haven't played since month 1, and I imagine if I were to revisit the game right now, it would be a completely different experience. But I
And
want to check it
it's
out
the
just
same
for that like
experience.
alienation that I
There's just
suspect I'll
more
feel.
stuff.
Yeah. But at what point does it feel different because they've added so much more stuff? You know, that maybe I think that's when I want to come back to the game, is when it feels like super different. But maybe that'll take like way too long to get to that point.
They're
But
saying it's better
yeah,
than
I
Pocky
am
and
a
Rocky
fellow
Reshined.
man of culture.
So
I
they're saying it's
don't
better
know what
than
that is,
Pocky and Rocky
unfortunately, but I
Reshrined.
will Google that and I will
That is
get
funny
back to you later.
timing.
I'm going to wrap up the show now.
Okay,
It's
plug-in stuff time. What's everybody working on?
Yeah, so I make
Jacob.
videos on YouTube. You can find them by searching Jacob Geller on YouTube. And I'm also on Twitter, also just Jacob Geller. Um, that's it. Go if you liked our conversations here. Certainly I've talked a lot about VR. I've talked a lot about Zelda as we talked about. I actually have. It is funny, Zach, that you brought it up. I have a video coming out in like a little less than 2 weeks that references Videodrome. So if you're a fan of Videodrome, subscribe and there will be something for you eventually.
Lovely movie.
If you're a
Lovely.
fan of anything that you listened to on Bad End Podcast, you should subscribe because you'll dig it. Period. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people in our Discord, patreon.com/bad end, if you want access, already know about Jacob Geller and his videos. But for folks who are listening who are not familiar, definitely check him out. Toss him a subscribe. And yeah, thank you so much for coming on the show, Jacob. We really appreciate
My pleasure.
it. And
I got just today we
Zach?
announced a new issue of Just today we finally announced the summer issue of Broken Pencil. Also dropped the rebrand of the magazine that's been running since 1995. We got our cover feature is artist Grant Inouye, aka HTML Flowers, writing about their experience with the pandemic as someone who has combated cystic fibrosis their whole life. And the issue generally looks at the relationship between the arts, where they went during this whole COVID unpleasantness. We also look at we spoke with folks at Club Quarantine. We spoke with the folks at Racer Trash, and we also have a piece about the emerging zine scene on TikTok.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I'm excited to see what everyone thinks. For those who don't know, Broken Pencil is a magazine, an alternative literary magazine that's been running since 1995 with a bigger emphasis on zine scenes, alt lit, and small press. So if that all is in your wheelhouse, in case it's closer to your end of the video game ring, then feel free to hop on board with all the comics and oddities we have in this circus I'm now running. It's the first issue of the magazine that I've edited from beginning to end, so I'm very excited to see how people respond.
as am I. I mean, we all know your editorial prowess, and we've
I'm now editing
Superculture, which Bad End Pod.
That's right.
You're now editing what?
I'm editing 3 magazines, so Funland, Broken Pencil, and Lock On. I'm all juggling like a circus clown, but it's fun. It's fun stuff.
New issue of Lock On is out, by the way. Go check that out as well. Friend of the show
Absolutely.
now, Lock On. Great magazine, great writers, a lot of Bad End adjacent people who have been on the show before are featured there. Go check them out. Not currently Superculture affiliated, but definitely friends of the show. So again, to wrap things up, we are Bad End Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. A couple quick plugs. We got merch store live now, so check that out. You can find it at our site, badendpodcast.com. We now have a merch tab. Check that out. I like the merch. I got the shirt. I got the hoodie. We got mugs. We got hats. A lot of things that people have been asking for a while now. And then we also got some new video stuff coming out on the Superculture video channel. So check us out there, youtube.com/superculture. Drop us a subscribe, and that would be super helpful. Rate us and review us on iTunes, all that good stuff. And we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Later.